what would be quite important for thinking, if you're someone who's interested in the one-state solution and how it might work, you might be interested in the lecture course that I gave on the first question of the John Locke Prize, whether there can be such a thing as too much democracy. Because there, what we did is we looked at what happens if democracy is imposed or introduced into conflict societies with sectarian divides or ethnic divides. What happens if there's a society where there's a lot of anger and there's not necessarily institutions that guarantee rights? What happens if you allow them to vote and elect their governments? And a lot of people say bad things happen, and they would cite examples like Iraq or Afghanistan, where the West has tried to set up institutions, young, new institutions, to ensure peace, and instead certain factions or certain parts of society quickly establish control. Democracy does not last long at all. However, certain people, I've used the phrase deliberative Democrats, but it's not just them. Some people do, and they're discussed in the first series of lectures. But lots of people think that you can achieve consensus and you can heal post-conflict societies really only by bringing them together. And there are a few examples that people point to, like Rwanda is, for instance, an example of one of the most horrendous genocides and civil wars that the world has seen, that now is, again, controversial, but is broadly seen as a relatively safe country. The UK Supreme Court recently ruled that it was not a sort of satisfactorily safe enough country to send for the UK to send migrants to, economic migrants to. But it is still certainly, the situation there is certainly a lot better than it was in the 1990s. So that's an example some people point to. Other people point to South Africa, which was obviously an apartheid regime with a minority white population oppressing the majority black population. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was established there in support of Nelson Mandela and the government in the 1990s was essentially what they did was they heard testimony from people who had been on the receiving end of injustices by the apartheid regime, mostly, but not I don't think exclusively. I think grievances were heard from both sides because, of course, even though the whites were very much the oppressors and a racist regime, of course, atrocities were committed against them as well. And that's really the idea of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is rather than, for instance, like other African leaders might have done, kicking out all white people or former rulers from the state, to try and have a rainbow nation, a nation in which all, regardless of race, could live peacefully and equally under the law. I mean, proponents of the one-state solution suggest that South Africa is an example for this. Other people think that if you allow communities to talk together on a small scale, so not through things like the media or politicians, but on a small community-based level, that when people, Palestinians and Israelis, actually speak to each other, there would be consensus and more peace. Other people think that the way to build peace is through development programs, economic incentives, that economics is a way to get people to work together, to develop financial incentives That is what we would call a liberal view. And that's something that we're going to explore next lecture.